Before we wrap up the session, as we mentioned in the very beginning, we have our sponsor Sprinto and Girish representing the company here. So I would like to give the word to Girish to give a quick presentation about Sprinto and sort of how it helps companies sort of navigate the compliance world these days. Girish, over to you.
Thanks, Ilya. Hi, everyone. Am I audible?
Yep.
Yes.
Let me share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
All right. Right. So thanks everyone for joining. I'm here to walk us through just a couple of slides on, why SaaS companies ought to look at compliances a little bit earlier than later in their life cycle, which is when it starts becoming a blocker in your sales cycle. So without further ado, let's just dive in. A little bit about me. I'm an engineer first. I'm happiest when I'm writing code and building things. Before Sprinto, I co-founded another B2B SaaS company called RecruiterBox. We scaled RecruiterBox to more than 2,500 customers from 2011 to 2017. And during that journey was my first trust with information security compliances. Like we had majority of our customers in the US, and we were constantly getting asked for SOC 2 and ISO 27001. And for a while, we did what everyone does as an early stage SaaS company, which is to wing it and say that, hey, we are hosted on AWS, and AWS is SOC 2 compliant, so we are good. But increasingly, it was becoming clear that this wasn't going to fly anymore. And especially as we started working with larger and larger customers, we were getting asked for demonstrating our compliance status and our security practices more and more. So, after kicking the can down the road for a while, we finally decided to bite the bullet and go through compliance journey ourselves. And to put it in a short sentence, it was an incredibly painful affair for us. 6 months and tens of thousands of dollars later, there was no light at the end of the tunnel. So sometime later, when we exited RecruiterBox, I was thinking of starting up again, and that experience at RecruiterBox was one of the most important reasons we picked to solve compliance as a problem at Sprinto. And at Sprinto in the last year itself, I've seen hundreds of companies go through this journey, and just wanted to share a few things that I've seen as startups, from really young startups to fairly late stage Series D, E, F startups go through this compliance journey, and what we've learned from the process. Now, some of you might already have seen this journey. This is what happens when you're going through a typical sales cycle with a high ticket or enterprise sale. You start with your first touch point, you've done your demo, you find your champion inside of their customers environment, and then you're fighting hard to get stakeholder buying. Many times there are more than one people who are involved in this decision. You work to negotiate both price and other items of your contract, and then you get to the stage where you're with procurement or IT and getting asked for security reviews, and this is where things tend to halt. And if you don't already have any of these compliances, depending on the industry or the geography that you work with, and these could be SOC 2, ISO 27001, GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, FedRAMP, NIST. It just depends on where you're operating. This is where things can get really, really halted. And this is extremely frustrating for you as a startup founder, because you've done all the hard work, and the deal seems to be stuck at a very, very last stage, at the last inch. And this is a typical scenario that we have seen. Now, the trouble with this thing is, this is all great, but fundamentally compliances are something that is also incredibly daunting to get to. And this is especially worse when you don't have dedicated internal teams for this, which most young startups won't. And I got a front row seat to this when we went through implementing compliances, like I was saying before. Now, I don't want us to go through this entire slide, but the broad idea being that it typically takes hundreds of hours and months of work, and this is painstaking, error-prone, manual, busy work in order to get yourself from a stage where you're today to the point where you basically become compliant. And a lot of things that you end up doing here just don't seem to make any sense. The whole process is extremely laborious, extremely painful, and most startups dread doing this. So my broad advice here, or my recommendation, having seen hundreds of startups go through this, is to is that it's important that you go through this earlier than later, and that's quite simply the simplest way to look at this. And if you're listening to this, you're most likely a B2B SaaS company, and cloud hosted fundamentally means, or cloud hosted SaaS fundamentally means, that my data is on your servers. And it's important to understand then that it's natural that I would want some assurance that you're keeping my data safe and secure. And compliances are nothing but a set of security practices that is giving that assurance to your customers that you're going to protect their sensitive data. And specifically there, what I'd say is that the reason you actually need compliances is, they are typically third-party audited, and that gives you a lot more credibility than just saying that, hey, we are secure, or showing your customers a bunch of security practices that you might be running, because they inherently carry a lot more credibility because they're independently and third-party audited by accredited, trained professionals. The second thing that compliances really help you do is it actually helps you shorten your sales cycles drastically, and helps you clear that last step that we were looking at, which is clearing the security due diligence. And that's like a great way of actually ensuring that you don't get stuck over there. As a young startup, you folks must have seen this. It's important to try and look formidable and dependable for your customers. Many startups eventually cease to exist, and one of the questions that your customers have, and they are actually worried about, is, are you going to be around tomorrow? Are you going to be keeping my data safe and secure? And they ask a bunch of proxy questions for this whole thing, right? So what compliances really allow you to do is it's allowing you to look a lot more formidable, a serious vendor. And this is important for especially your high ticket deals. Last but not the least, we are seeing that compliances are increasingly becoming like a competitive space. If you are not compliant while your competition is, it's going to be one of the factors over and above the features and the value prop of your product when your customer or prospect makes a decision. So, at least in order to show yourself to be on par with maybe your more established competition, or to avoid yourself from getting wedged by competition, or to reverse the tables and actually stand out from your competition, compliances is one of the ways that you can look at this. And the broad idea again being is that instead of thinking of security compliances as a defensive step, as something that you do because you've been asked to, I'm increasingly seeing more and more startups think of this as something that they lead with, by which I mean that you put this front and center as a part of your enterprise sale. You start with this somewhere early on in your sales pitch. So you're sort of demonstrating confidence, and you're demonstrating the fact that you don't look at this as an afterthought. And this is important for you as a company. I think anybody who has done enterprise sales will sort of implicitly know this, that at the end of the day, enterprises are extremely risk averse entities. They want to do business with companies that don't pose risks to them, and their job is on the line and their neck is on the line, and they want to work with formidable vendors. You could have the best bleeding edge technology, but at the end of the day, one of the things that they absolutely want to make sure is that you cross the threshold of be looking like a safe, secure, formidable vendor. And that's going to be important thing to internalize if you're going to do enterprise sales. Like I was saying, it's important to get this done earlier and faster before it becomes a deal breaker. And depending on the geography and the industry that you work with, you would need a compliance strategy, and you need to decide which of these compliances are making more sense for you. And these differ depending on the geography and the industry that you're working with. So, if you're working with customers in the US, you're likely going to get asked for SOC 2 fairly early on. In Asia Pacific and in Europe, you're going to get asked for ISO 27000 were fairly early on. And then there are privacy laws, which are depending on the geography that you work with. Again, the GDPR, UK GDPR. If you're working with customers in California, it likely get asked for CCPA. If you're working with the government in the US, you're going to get asked for FedRAMP and so on and so forth. So there's a broad range of compliances that you might have to adhere to as time goes on, but you can think about the sequence in which you go about this, depending on the nature of your industry, the nature of the geography that you work with. But those are some important decisions that you need to do. Again, a reason to do this earlier than later is so that you can give yourself some time rather than bending over backward once the deal is at risk. And that's mostly what I had to share. I'm at Girish at Sprinto.com. If in case you have any questions about this, and happy to chat more or share more details if anything helps you over here. And feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
Girish, thank you very much for your time and for the presentation. I believe we will have Sprinto representatives present in the networking lounge for an hour after this session. So if you guys have any questions, please join and ask the questions. And with that, this is a wrap up to this session. Again, thank you very much for everyone who joined, presented, and helped us judge. And we will see the winner in the grand finale. Thank you very much. And then the next track, which is horizontal SaaS pitching track, will be starting in a couple of minutes in the other session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Very nice being here. Bye.